After just a few days in Mardin, it was time to head back from whence I came, the bus station in Diyarbakır. Hopefully this time I wouldn't have the same experience with the police as I did on my way into Mardin. Fortunately, all I had to deal with was a decently cheap taxi.
So I've made it to Diyarbakır, which is a city about 2 hours north of Mardin, which is the last city that I was in. Now, Diyarbakır is one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in the world. In fact, the archaeological record for continuous inhabitation here goes back about 3,000 years. And this city, much like Mardin and most of Turkey, was once a part of the Roman province of Asia and eventually the Byzantine Empire until, like Mardin, in the mid-600s, it was conquered by the Rashiduns and incorporated into the caliphate there. As territory changed hands between the caliphates to the Abbasids and eventually to the Seljuks and the Ottomans, so did the city of Diyarbakır, but that did not mean that it lost its importance in both regional, cultural, and religious history, as it has been for several centuries now, one of the hubs of Islamic scholarship and the outside of the Arabian world.
My name's Jack Rogers. In June of 2023, I decided I'd had it with normal life and set out to travel the world. 2 years later, I'm still going. I've seen some cool things in my time. I've swam the Nile, followed a matador around Spain, dived the world's oceans, and even returned to Iraq after 5 years away. Now I'm off on my next expedition, an 18-month trek through some of the world's most fascinating pilgrimages. My journey will take me to 12 countries as I walk in the shoes of religious pilgrims, ancient traders, and soldiers who blazed these trails centuries ago. This isn't just another trip. Unlike my first journey, I won't be walking the earth aimlessly. This is a chance to walk with purpose, to trace the footsteps of those who move for faith and survival. These routes carry stories, and I intend to find mine among them. I've never attempted anything like this before, but after 2 years of discovering what this world has to offer, I'm ready to take the plunge into some of life's deeper meaning. I'll be tested, physically and mentally, but I know in the end, it will all be worth it as I become a wayfarer. Diyarbakır was a big city, much bigger than I anticipated, but its old town streets were just as congested as I had expected. And my first stop, as would become my tradition moving forward, was the Ulu Cami, or the Grand Mosque. Unlike many in Turkey, this Ulu Cami still held a prominent position in between the bazaars, shops, and restaurants.
I'm often asked why it is that I tend to wear my long sleeve, kind of thin sweatshirt around, and I wear, normally it's a shamag, but here in the Wayfarer Expedition, I've got a makeshift shamag out of a cotton cloth, and then why I wear long pants in this part of the world, and there's a couple reasons for that. One, I like wearing long pants. I like wearing this around my neck. It's got a lot of practical purposes to it, absorbing sweat, keeping the sun off of your neck when it's a bit hot, bright and sunny like it is out there right now. But also, like, I've offered this to women who don't have a headscarf to wear into a mosque before, and then, you know, I wear the long pants because it's a sign of respect that shorts don't have in mosques like the Grand Mosque here in Diyarbakır. And I wear long sleeves, even though I've got short sleeves on underneath so my shoulders are covered, just as kind of a sign of respect for where I'm at. I don't like to actively participate in religions other than my own, but I am absolutely willing to show basic signs of respect, like covering down to my knees, covering over my shoulders, not wearing my hat indoors, things like that. Some places, though, like this one, offer dress headscarves. They even offer longer pants for men. That is the case with several mosques in Istanbul as well, but I have been in some that they don't, and they will stop you from going in if you're not wearing the proper thing. This is kind of why I wear this stuff. Of course, no good deed goes unpunished, and, you know, I'm wearing what I'm supposed to be wearing. I go to take my shoes off to enter the mosque, and one man gets mad at me, and I don't understand why, because it doesn't work for the mosque. It's just, and apparently I had let my foot touch the ground before it hit the carpet, which made it unclean, and that made him mad. And on the one hand, like, I do try to respect other religions, but also, or respect practices that are not participating in the religion. But at that point, it's like, dude, like, clearly I'm not from here, and clearly I'm making a really big effort. And it's just crap like that in every religion really just makes it a big turnoff for a lot of people.
This Ulu Cami was built in the late 1000s under the Seljuks, and it became one of the earliest and most influential mosques in all of Anatolia. In fact, it's the 5th holiest mosque in Islam. It was modeled after the Great Mosque of Damascus, reflecting the region's connection to early Islamic traditions. Over the centuries, it would become a center of religious scholarship, drawing theologians, jurists, and students from across the Islamic world. This Ulu Cami is unique because it has 4 main facades, each representing one of the 4 schools of Sunni Islamic thought: Hanafi, Shafi, Maliki, and Hanbali. This arrangement made the mosque a shared space for scholars and worshippers from different legal traditions, reflecting Diyarbakır's intellectual and theological diversity. Each facade was used by its respective school for study and prayer, turning the complex into both a mosque and a center of Islamic learning. This layout symbolized unity within diversity, a rare architectural expression of harmony amongst different Sunni traditions.
Now, to my right here is the women's mosque, and in Islam they don't believe in practicing the same place, so there's often women's only spaces, men's only spaces. Not often, there are men's only spaces, women's only spaces. Sometimes women are upstairs, sometimes they're in separate mosques like this, and some modern contemporary studies of Islam try to promote the idea that, in Islam men and women are equal, or women are even above men. I've heard this from 20-something-year-old Muslims who live in Europe, but unfortunately things like that are a definitive indicator that's not the case. Also, with the mosques in Izmir and everywhere else, they say women's entrance here. That's just what modern scholars try to say versus what is actually put into practice. They just don't line up. Usually that in Christianity too, but the purpose of this journey is to learn about Islam.
Now, I'm not one that likes to judge other cultures or religions, and I try to understand the reasoning behind their thoughts. But too many times in the last 2 years of travel, I've had liberal reformists within the Muslim faith, specifically young 20s women, try to tell me that in Islam, women are equal to men. Well, with divisions like these, that just didn't seem to me to be the case. Even here at the Sayyid Cami, with its famous minaret that people line up to take pictures beneath, there is this clear division, where the women's worship area is upstairs, and they even have a separate entrance outside.
Now, the thing about old cities, or old parts of the cities like this part of Diyarbakır, is they're old. I mean, 3,000 years the city's been occupied. So you can see this red barrier behind me, and you can see it in front of the mosque there. It's being renovated, it's being kept up, which I appreciate as a person with a history degree and who enjoys cultures like this. But as a traveler, it can take away, but I can look past that in the name of preserving culture and history.
The Ulu Cami, or the Ulu Mosque, is one of Diyarbakır's most important mosques, as it represents the moment when the city fully integrated into the Ottoman world after centuries of Seljuk dynastic rule. Unfortunately, I couldn't get in, or so I thought.
It looks like I might have found an entrance though, so let's check it out.
I arrived just as prayer time was beginning, so I spent some time exploring the grounds and taking videos and pictures. Now, I knew that renovations and restorative efforts had been undertaken over the last several hundred years, but it was still hard to believe that this mosque was built in the 1510s. It looked like it could have been built yesterday using the same architecture that I had seen all over the Middle East. I mentioned this in my video in Mardin, but they actually have a term for this. In English we call it Neo-Medehar, but in Arabic and the Muslim world, they simply call it Islamic art and architecture. It's considered good manners as a visitor at a mosque to wait outside until all the prayers are complete and everyone's left. So when the prayers ended and all the men walked out, I was sitting on the ledge. One man walked up to me and started speaking to me in English. I guess I looked like I didn't speak Turkish. It turned out he was the Imam, and he invited me in to take pictures and videos, and even share tea with him. After a long conversation and tea, I headed out to explore some more of the city. Specifically a few more mosques as I completed my loop around the old city and made my way steadily back to the mountain gate. I'd be lying if I didn't say that I got a few stares from older men. In most Middle Eastern countries, most non-Muslims aren't allowed in the mosques. Turkey is different though. As part of the reforms instituted by Ataturk as the first leader of the Republic of Turkey, all mosques became public entities and state-operated. The thinking behind this was to deprive the imams of separate power from the political state. In theory, this would prevent religious uprisings against the government.
So I just had the privilege, and it was a privilege, of sitting in Imam's office, essentially, and speaking to him about Islam and Turkey, history, religiosity. Full disclosure, he knew I was Christian, but that I was exploring faith. And it was awesome because as a foreigner, as a Christian especially, you don't often get those opportunities in a lot of countries because non-Muslims are not allowed in the mosques. And you don't often just in general get to meet an imam kind of in a big area like this, because they have a lot of things they have to do. In fact, when he pulled me into his office to talk, he was bombarded with paperwork and checks and everything else he needed to do just as the leader of the church. But it was a really good conversation because he explained to me in non-judgmental ways, in non-extremist ways, which when I say that, I don't mean that to be insulting. I say that because that's been my experience with Islam from a professional perspective, and I did tell him that. Some of the tenets and ideals and core beliefs of Islam, and he answered several of my questions to my satisfaction, which many people have not been able to do. His name was Omar. He even gifted me a Quran, which I was actually very thankful for because it's very hard to find a good English translation of a Quran, and I did want to read the Quran going through Turkey, but I couldn't find a good translation, and he had a good I read a couple pages of it. It was very good, so now I have that. And even though I don't plan on converting, it will still give me the opportunity to increase my knowledge in the religion, to understand it a bit better. And Omar is convinced that I will like it very much. So thank you, Omar, if you see this video, for that, from your brother Jack, as he called me. And that's it for this day. And as I've walked around seeing all these mosques and religious sites, they're very important. They kind of track through all sorts of different aspects of Diyarbakır's history, but what about the rest of it? What about the Ottomans? What about the Seljuks? So that's going to be what I explore tomorrow.
And explore it I did, starting with the Diyarbakır Archaeology Museum. Lucky enough for me, it was pretty close to my hotel, just about an 8 to 10 minute walk. This museum is not what I was expecting. I was expecting just a single hardstand building with a bunch of artifacts inside. Instead, I got an open-air complex. Every building in this complex held some sort of significance for the city, whether it was an old military building or just a place that Ataturk stayed during one of his visits.
Something to know about Turkish museums is that in early 2024, not long after my first visit to Turkey, they changed their policies. They don't advertise anything in lira anymore. It's all in euros, but they only accept lira. So you're going to get whatever the exchange rate is at that moment when they put it into their app. Unless you're paying in euros, which you can't do. So that's just something to be aware of when you come to museums like this one.
I've said in prior videos that I don't like to record in museums, and that holds true for this one. So if you want to see what's in here, better go take a look.
Behind me, where you can see the kind of archaeological dig going on, is called the Mound, and that is the oldest known discovered site of civilization here in Diyarbakır, which is a pretty cool thing to come across, that we can go, oh yeah, it started right there.
I was a little shocked to find an intact Christian church at this museum, but when the city's been continuously occupied for 3,000 years, I guess it's understandable that there would be some remnants around. This one is the St. George Church, built in the 500s during the time of the Byzantine Empire, and it has long been a center of Christian life in Diyarbakır. Over the centuries, it has served different denominations, from Greek Orthodox to Syriac to Chaldean, reflecting the layered Christian heritage of the region. During the early Islamic and Ottoman eras, the church did remain active and stood as one of the few enduring places of worship for local Christians. It is named for St. George, the soldier martyr whose story of faith and endurance became a symbol for believers facing hardship. For the Christians of Diyarbakır, the church represented not just a sanctuary, but a quiet declaration of survival and devotion amid shifting empires and changing faiths. The church's decline began in the late Ottoman period, but it was the events of 1915, the Sayfo, or the Assyrian genocide, that sealed its fate. As Diyarbakır's Christian population was killed or driven out, St. George was left without a community to sustain it. By the early 20th century, it was nothing more than a relic. I've always enjoyed views like this one, where you could stand on the city or castle walls and look out across the plains that the city or castle was there to defend. Now, instead of armies on the horizon, there's a university off in the distance. And with that idea in mind, I set off to leave the museum and go walk these 3,000 plus year old city walls myself.
I'm currently walking on top of the defensive walls around the city. Now, it's widely debated, and the common refrain in museums and boards is that no one really knows who built these walls originally, although you can tell by the construction they've been upkept and updated over the years. And it's also right next to the Sade Kapi, which is right there. One of 4 gates, this wall town. Like all wall towns of old, they had gates that were named after the places they went. This was true in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, where the Pilgrim's Gate was where they welcomed the pilgrims, where the Navarre Gate went out to Navarre. It's the case in, I forget the name of the town, but in Iraqi Kurdistan, where they have the Mosul Gate, which goes out to Mosul. It's the case here. So this is the Sade Kapi. You also have, not far from here, the Northern Gate, which is the Mountain Gate. And headed out west, you have the Urfa Gate, which goes to Urfa. And to the south, you have the Mardin Gate, which goes to Mardin, which is where I came from. Really interesting that these walls are still so intact. Not all of them, but a substantial portion of these walls are intact. In fact, Ataturk, who is the post-Ottoman leader of Turkey, made it a point to preserve these walls as part of Turkey's and the Diyarbakır's cultural heritage, which I really like. And they actually, in that museum that I didn't take a video of it, but they actually have a layout of the modern city, the modern part of the old city, I guess I should say, within the walls and what is where for your reference. I could even point out to my hotel, which was really cool.
Something I enjoyed about walking these city walls was not just that I could see all the minarets across the town, although that was really cool. It was being able to see how all of these old sites had been turned into public spaces where people could enjoy picnics, walks outside, or even just spend time with their family. Plus, it was nice for the parents, I'm sure, to have a place where their kids could run around and get rid of all their energy. After walking the walls, I went to explore one of the Hans in the city. A Han is basically a Seljuk or Ottoman era inn, commercial lodging site, or trading hub. While they once served as warehouses or checkpoints or refuges for weary pilgrims, they now often hold restaurants, cafes, and self-service kiosks for people to enjoy time out. They're a really nice place to sit and relax and drink your coffee if you have the time, but it's important to note that these are sort of tourist traps in their own way.
Now, while there aren't many Christian churches left outside of certain major population centers like in Mardin and in Istanbul, there are some spread out across the country. It is legal to be Christian here in Turkey, and there's one not far from Ulu Cami that I'm going to go check out. So let's go see it. I don't know anything about it. I don't know its history, but I do know that it's here in the old city, so it's got to be at least a couple hundred years old.
Now, I was going to stop at this one, which is why I have video of it, but you had to pay to enter, so I walked right past it to the one next door. Sharp Girgos Kilisesi has long been the heart of Diyarbakır's Armenian Christian community. It was originally built in the 14th century and rebuilt several times after fires and wars, serving for centuries as a spiritual and cultural center for local Armenians. During the events of 1915, the Seyfo, the church was seized and its congregation scattered, marking one of the darkest moments in its history. For decades afterwards, it sat empty. Yet, Sharp Girgos also became a symbol of resilience. When it was restored and reopened in the 2010s, it briefly stood again as a living space of worship, remembrance, and identity for Armenians returning to visit their ancestral city. Personally, I was a little shocked at how few people there were visiting this church. Most people visiting one of the churches stopped at the one right next door that you had to pay to enter, because they were visiting the famous minaret that they would walk around and take their pictures underneath. Of course, that was probably for the better, because that would mean that this church would remain in pristine condition. One of my last stops in Diyarbakır before heading back to the hotel was an old Sufi mansion. Sufism is a sort of mystic interpretation and practice in Islam, with roots in both Sunni and Shia Islamic beliefs. This mansion is an old house that was eventually turned into a museum, and fortunately for me, it was free to enter. It had exhibits dedicated to Sufism and other Turkish cultural practices, including dancing, music, and oral traditions. While I really enjoyed the grounds and enjoyed the fact that the mansion was preserved in the local style, my favorite exhibit was the audio-visual of the traditional Turkish dancing, which I took a video of. And with that, I headed to my last destination on my walk through the city, the Mardin Gate. It was a lot like the last gate that I had seen, with the city walls you could climb up and the wide open park, but it wasn't as well kept. I could understand why though, as it was quite a ways from any tourist hotel and all the main attractions. Still, it was pretty cool to walk through the gate and face the direction from whence I came, and think of all the travelers that have once walked under its arches.
And that brings me to the Mardin Gate right there. This is the southernmost gate. It heads to Mardin in that direction. That's the direction once I came. Of course, I didn't go through this gate. I was in a big bus, and this was a walking pedestrian gate. That is it though for my exploration here in Diyarbakır, at least as far as the video goes. Got a couple more things I'm gonna go see, but as I said after my first trip to Spain, algunas cosas son solo para mí. Hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like it, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you don't miss a single thing coming to you from the adventure across the world. And with that, see you guys on the road.